Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every week to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace, and its absence, playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. Glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God.
Happy birthday to us. Happy birthday to us. It's kind of an arbitrary thing, 200 episodes, but I feel it's worth celebrating in a world in which
we've made it, baby.
We've managed to keep it going for a little while. Since 2016, off and on, a few breaks in there, but thank you if you've been listening this entire time. God bless you, but also
those people don't exist.
They gave up a long time ago.
They gave up a long time ago.
But it is such an honor, and as we always say, it's a labor of love. So, reflections from you. We've got a lot of people wrote in to sort of share some of their favorite moments. But before we read some of those, what do you guys think, Sarah, RJ?
I cannot believe people listen to this. It really genuinely, I say this to people when we get these like sweet emails and stuff. It genuinely feels like just having a conversation with two of my friends. And I feel really lucky that I talk to you guys more than I talk to a lot of my friends. And I feel really lucky to get to do that. So it's amazing that anyone listens to this to me.
I feel the same way. It's just like one of the best things in my life. And you two are so funny and talented and insightful. There have been so many weeks where I'm like, what am I going to preach this Sunday? And then the Mockingcast comes up like, oh, there you go, a little gift. Yeah. What a huge blessing to be spend time with you guys and then to be useful by God's grace in other people's lives, to be useful sinners, to quote a Mockingbird publication. It's been fun and just humbled to do this with you guys. So thank you. And thanks to everyone out there who listens. Jeez Louise.
Yes.
I don't think I expected to enjoy, sometimes projects have a shelf life.
Didn't expect to enjoy spending time with the two of you.
I didn't expect to enjoy it.
I expected to enjoy being with you guys. I didn't know if I expected to enjoy the format so much. I like it. The whole thing is essentially improvised because none of us have scripts, and that is so refreshing, to hear. We just go wherever it takes us, basically, with some signposts along the way. And I understand, I guess, why podcasts have become so popular, having to put these together now for however many years.
But Dave, I gotta say, you tee it up. You teed up pretty well, man. You're the curator. Like, you're the one who picks the articles. You're the one who reads all this stuff.
Blame Dave.
You make our lives pretty easy. So just kudos to you, David Zoll, for all that you have accomplished. And,
well, it is interesting. If you figure out what can be teed up and what shouldn't be teed up, and what. And also, like, there's been a few times there's a few outtakes out there that someone will hopefully never hear unless Sarah runs for president one day, in which case
and it's all coming.
It's all going public. Mutually assured destruction.
It's very
no one will
rare.
put me up for bishop, but they will nominate me for president.
I think that says something. That says something important. I was asking people about their favorite moments of the last, of the run. And Sarah, Get in the Pool got like 4 or 5 different votes from people.
Absolutely.
Oh, no,
you're going to die.
Get in the pool. You're going to die. But also...
Do we have T-shirts with that yet? We need T-shirts.
I think there was
Mugs,
a moment
T-shirts,
when we did.
bumper stickers. We need it.
RJ, someone wrote in to say that your Jesus' Aunt Becky riff that was completely unplanned was that was the penny dropped for them in a very powerful way. And then anytime we've referenced our Holy Trinity of Dolly Parton, Fred Rogers, or Weird Al, a lot of people have mentioned those episodes in particular as being kind of fun. I guess we have to find some more characters to profile. But wait, I have another one person in Chattanooga said that she actually thought RJ was the one singing "Praise the Lord" during the opener. And I have heard from some folks that enjoy it.
That's absurd.
It's me, clearly.
Obviously.
Let's
she's
hear
in
it,
space.
RJ.
What
Come
are
on,
you
you
going to do?
can do it. You can do it.
Praise the Lord.
Oh my God.
Praise the
RJ.
Lord God. I definitely, yes, I have that much soul. Absolutely. I'm that much soul over here in West Palm Beach, Florida.
Dutch soul.
The best kind of soul.
Here's a message from someone on Instagram named L. Bex. She said, I look forward to the Mockingcast every week. I love hearing your take on cultural commentary and how to see the world through a grace-tinted lens. This has opened my eyes to examples of grace everywhere in my own life and in the media I take in. The Mockingcast has deeply encouraged me in my parenting, and I really enjoy hearing about how you navigate the difficult waters of kids in our anxiety-filled culture. The Mockingcast has let me accept grace for myself and give it so much easier. Thank you for keeping it real, being smart, and enjoying your forgiveness. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you, Elbex. I appreciate that.
That's so sweet.
I got Ben Fort wrote in to say, what I appreciate most about the Mockingcast is how it's helped shape my vision over time. Because of the podcast, the dynamics of grace and law are easier for me to see in the news and in my life. Sarah, do you have the one that I told you? That
I do.
Told you? Sarah, why don't you read that one?
Okay. I was introduced to the Mockingcast by my pastor shortly after you three became the full-time hosts, and I have been deeply grateful for it ever since. I will never forget Sarah telling that lady to get into the pool because she was going to die someday. or RJ breaking his fast because he found a free juice stand.
Unlimited juice?
Unlimited
This
juice.
party is going to be off the...
It's gonna be lit. I got my beret. And Dave's memes and articles frequently make my day. My pastor and I joke that we must be closeted Episcopalians since we both love the podcast so much. But really, it's just a testament to your balance of human stories and struggles and your wisdom steeped in God's grace. You keep me laughing and crying in equal measure. It is my weekly reminder that no one has this Christianity thing on lockdown, and that my inability to meet the law is just an amplification of God's amazing forgiveness. Ooh, honey, you are preaching to me right now. I need to hear that. Y'all are goofy, grounding, and loving, and have been an inspiration in my own walk with Christ. Thank you for all you do, and congrats on the 200th episode milestone. I don't know if y'all want to do another 200 episodes, but I'll be listening if you do. That's so sweet.
That's so good.
Gosh,
Thank you.
guys.
Thank
yeah,
you.
thank you.
Rutger?
That's from Kelsey.
Yeah, one from Tom, which is... fits with our current moment. In a world where hard left and hard right are constantly screaming at me from every direction, the Mockingcast is my rest and respite, where grace and peace carry the day. Without ever being overly political, the laughs, banter, and intelligent discussion by Dave, Sarah, and RJ take me to a place of Sabbath each and every time I listen. I'm always brought back to the cross, forgiveness, and yes, grace. I'm constantly recommending the Mockingcast to friends and acquaintances. Couldn't we all use more grace in our lives? That's great.
Oh,
And then there's one more too. And this just reminds me how much of, I don't know, how much of what I say is just stuff I've heard from other people. I'm just a mockingbird, you know? And someone was talking about something I'd said when they were in a moment of transition in their life, and they were trying to make a decision and filled with anxiety. And I said something about, God will be with you no matter what you decide, right? No matter what you decide, no matter where you go, God will be with you. And that's something that our dear friend Jonathan Adams said to me. Now probably about, 10 years ago, when I was in a moment of transition and anxiety. And he said, RJ, you can't make a wrong decision, because wherever you go, wherever you end up, God will be with you. And so that was me just passing along that word of comfort I needed in my life that connected with someone who needed it in theirs. So
shout out to Joe Nathan.
That's right. I'm grateful for Mockingbird Nation, all those people out there.
Oh, that's great. I had
God.
someone, another person wrote in on Facebook to say how much he loves the podcast. He looks forward to it every time. I love the vulnerability and the emphasis on grace. This is Jeremy speaking. I found out about Mockingbird Googling Robert Farr Capon quotes.
Oh
I have
my
almost
gosh.
every book he's ever written, and I have read almost all of them. From Mockingbird, then I learned about the podcast. During COVID, I've gone back and listened to most of the ones I missed. Please keep up the great work, the finding of grace in different articles and sharing it with us. This podcast has been a life breath for those of us recovering from the guilt and the law of what are you doing with your quarantine? And to which I answer, I am listening to the Mockingcast, damn it. Grace and peace to you and Sarah and RJ. And they kept coming in. So it's really fun just to hear, this is not to say any of the random emails we get from people. So do be in touch with us. We love hearing from you. And unless it's criticism, in which case...
That's right. In which case, keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
Oh,
don't ask for that.
That's right.
Someone also mentioned anytime there's a Jesus showing up with a handful of Lexapro moment, they love that. I heard a shout out for the Bondage of the Will mini cast, which was a little experiment a few summers ago.
Yeah.
Someone talked about the listening for confession story that I told a couple weeks ago. Janelle said that it gave me restored hope to offer in confidence that the grace of Jesus has carried us this far and will lead us home. Wow. Golly gee, it's hard to follow that up.
Wow. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
It's been what a great episode. We'll see you next time.
Well, for our 200th episode, my idea was to delve into some of the articles that predate our podcast and stuff that seems to continue to carry relevance and also just fit the vibe of what it is we're doing here. And the first one, I felt like we couldn't go without doing one of Tim Kreider's greatest hits. One of Tim Kreider, the essayist and who wrote for the New York Times for a long time. And he wrote an essay that was collected in his book called We Learn Nothing. The essay is called The Tsar's Daughter. This was really connected with people, I think back in like 2012, way back then. And it involves a deceased friend of Tim's whose name's Skelly. Apparently, Skelly was quite the character who was reputed in the stories, in their own circles, for the stories he told about himself, most of which were, in Tim's word, not in the strictest, most literal-minded sense of the word true. But he describes Skelly as a teller of tall tales who's lovable in the extreme and a self-described Christian. Now, after he died, Tim and his friends learned some rather disconcerting truths about Skelly's mental health. And reflecting on what made their unconventional friend tick, Tim wrote this essay, which introduced an inspired term that I've gotten a lot of mileage out of, as has Mockingbird, that they used to describe Skelly's behavior and also the judgments we face in our daily lives. Here's Tim. He says, knowing things about someone is not the same thing as knowing them. As far as I know, none of Skelly's friends cared about the facts of his life that embarrassed him so deeply. If anything, we were just sorry that he'd ever felt the need to tell us these ridiculous stories. It implied that, on some level, he felt badly about himself, as if he didn't believe we'd like him for who he really was. What someone's lies reveal about them, aspirations to being an accomplished writer, fantasies of an exotic history and a cosmopolitan family, are always sadder than the fact of the lies themselves. Years ago, here's where we sort of get to the term itself. Years ago, a friend of mine and I used to frequent a market in Baltimore where we would eat oysters and drink beer. One of the regulars there had the worst toupee in the world. A comical little wig taped in place on the top of his head. Looking at this man, we developed the concept of the soul toupee. Each of us has a soul toupee. The soul toupee is that thing about ourselves we are most deeply embarrassed by and like to think we have cunningly concealed from the world, but which is in fact pitifully obvious to everybody who knows us. Contemplating one's own soul toupee is not an exercise for the faint-hearted. Most of the time, other people don't even get why our soul toupee is any big deal or a cause of such evident deep shame to us. But they can tell that it is because of our inept, transparent efforts to cover it up, which only call more attention to it and to our self-consciousness about it. And so they gently pretend not to notice it. Meanwhile, we're standing there with our little rigid sponge-like square of hair pasted on our heads thinking, "Ha! Got 'em all fooled." What's so ironic and sad about this is that the very parts of ourselves that we're most ashamed of and eager to conceal are not only obvious to everyone else, but are also quite often the parts of us they love best. Skelly's stories themselves, not their content, but the fact of his telling them, were part of what we liked about him.
So good.
Soul toupees.
I remember when this came out though, because hair loss for me started 2009, and I was like, I'm not reading this. It's too much.
Not reading anything about
together
a soul toupee
at once for me. I don't know. This makes me think a lot about, and people, I don't know, people can be really harsh about this, but I think it's valuable, about like inner child work and, thinking about the little person that lives in all of us and what that person needed and maybe didn't get, and what that person longed for and hoped for, and what that person was afraid of, and how that's really still true now, right? And that some of the most beloved hopes and dreams that little person had are still there. I recently was a reader for my daughter's first grade class. And I think I've said on here before, like I always wanted to be a elementary school teacher, but I never like said that out loud because it's not like a strong feminist thing to do, in my little brain it wasn't. And I don't know, there was something so beautiful about that moment, about being with those kids in that moment in that way, and that like fed me. I don't know. I think also recently, I've been avoiding, you guys, this is like the lamest, but I have always wanted to do calligraphy. Even when I was a little kid, I like had the little calligraphy sets you would get, and I was obsessed with them. And I, as an adult, calligraphy is very in right now, right? Like, are you even a Christian woman if you don't have a print in your house from Hobby Lobby written in, calligraphy by a small child in China that says, "It is well with my soul." And
all shall be well, and all shall be well. And
all shall be well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I really with a lot of trepidation bought myself a calligraphy book and a set of pens, and I was convinced my husband was going to make fun of me. For whatever reason, I don't know why, I was convinced he was going to make fun of me. And I kind of like low-key pulled it out. We're sitting on the couch together and like started like practicing very poorly at calligraphy. And he goes, "I'm in such awe of you." And it was like such a beautiful, it was like this thing about myself that is sort of gentle and creative, which is never how I want to be perceived. And that he loved it so much in that moment was just, I don't know. I really, these parts of ourselves that we hide, and the fact that we think we're hiding them is so funny. And that God sees it all and loves us for it.
That's a great story. I have a really dear friend who's a calligrapher of the sort of highest order, and watching
she's
her,
like very good. Yes. Yeah.
watching her, I get so in awe of, and every time you actually see the person do it, when you, it's truly an art. And anyway, this is neither here nor there, but I think it's a very impressive skill. Well, RJ, what you've got your whole face is covered in a soul toupee. So
I'm just one big soul toupee. Exactly.
Which aspect of it are we going to talk about right now?
I don't know. It's terrifying. It is. It's terrifying. It's like, gosh, does everyone really see me? Do they see how much I want to be liked, and how much encouragement I need, and how insecure I am, and all that sort of stuff? What is you can't not read this article and wonder to yourself, what's my soul toupee?
Yeah.
Is it as bad as I think it is, or is it worse? Which one is it?
Right.
But it reminds me, I think I've told this story before, that, early on in our married life and relationship, I think my wife and I, we'd go to church and we liked church and stuff, but we also just thought to ourselves, gosh, Christians are so weird. They're weird. And then the older we got, we're like, no. everyone is weird. It's just that Christians, you're around them a little more, and they're a little more comfortable with their oddities or something like that. And then as we've been married for longer, we see each other's soul toupees more clearly. Like when I'm being encouraging to my wife, and I'm like, "Gosh, honey, you're the best, and you just look so beautiful, and you're you're an amazing mother." And she looks at me, and she goes, "Oh, honey, do you need some encouragement right now?" It's that. I'm like, oh,
I thought I was hiding. I thought you couldn't tell that.
What kind of question is that? But there is, right, that this essay is a beautiful picture of what real relationships, real friendships, real community looks like, where you see each other's soul toupees and you love each other anyway.
Yeah, there's a quote that we use quite a bit, or we have used in the past, from Walker Percy, that we love those who see the worst of us and don't turn their face away. And I've been reading the book from which that quote comes, called Love in the Ruins, and it's a uproariously funny, unnervingly prophetic book. But that passage is when he's checked himself into a mental institution for a complete breakdown, and he talks about the freedom he experiences as part of this institution of sort of, I don't know, outcast, or it's not cuckoo's nest, but it's close, and that's what he's talking about. He's saying that the other patients at the clinic saw him for who he was at his worst, and they loved him still. That's where he experienced that. I thought that was a really interesting little fill in the context for that beautiful, almost calligraphyable quote. Made me think of, I remember a few years ago walking in on a couple of my wonderful Mockingbird colleagues, Will McDavid and Ethan Richardson, and they were doing an impression of me, acting like I was paying attention, like trying not to be distracted. I guess I'm very distractible, and some people say I've got ADHD and that I can't multitask and all these things. And I think that I've completely hidden that part of myself, and that no one knows that. I'm just thoroughly present everywhere I go, ministry of presence. And they had me down cold, and I was like at the same time I was like, oh crap. But then I also felt like really, really loved. It was a moment. They weren't doing it in. Maybe there was a slight bit of edge to it, but for the most part, it was like, that's just who Dave is. How long do I have his attention for? When is he gonna get off the phone and all that stuff? So, I felt very loved in that moment, because that's what grace is. That's what grace is, when people love. It also reminded me of that wonderful quote from Mary Carr. When she was talking about memoirs and reading memoirs, that work and that don't work. And she said, "We each nurture a private terror that some core aspect of either ourselves or our story must be hidden or disowned. Yet with every manuscript I've ever edited, even grown-assed writers, the traits a writer often fights hardest to hide may serve as undeniable facets of both self and story."
It reminds me too, Dave, of another term we've used quite a bit in the podcast, that a soul toupee is the opposite of the purity spiral, right? It's the complete opposite.
Yeah,
it's seeing each other as we are and loving each other, as opposed to making this, unbelievable, harsh demand that you must be perfect and pure. And yeah.
Well, we're going to move on from soul toupees onto America the Anxious. One of our abiding themes on this podcast is anxiety. And Ruth Whipman, who is an English writer who lives in America, she wrote an unbelievable article about America and about happiness and anxiety. And she wrote it back in 2012 and then turned it into a book which came out. And this is what she writes. Despite being the richest nation on earth, the United States is, according to the World Health Organization, by a wide margin, also the most anxious, with nearly a third of Americans likely to suffer from an anxiety problem in their lifetime. America's precocious levels of anxiety are not just happening in spite of the great national happiness rat race, but also perhaps because of it. In America, happiness is work. Intense, nail-biting work, slogged out in motivational seminars and therapy sessions, meditation retreats, and airport bookstores. For the left, there's yoga. For the right, there's Jesus. For no one is there respite. There is something joyless about the whole shindig. The people taking part in happiness pursuits, as a rule, don't seem very happy. At the one and only yoga class I attended, shortly after arriving in the United States, the tension and misery in the room was palpable. Which makes sense because a person who was already feeling happy would be unlikely to waste the sensation in a sweaty room at the YMCA. The happy person would be more likely to be off doing something fun, like sitting in a park drinking. Since moving to the States just shy of a year ago, I've had more conversations about my own happiness than in the whole rest of my life. The subject comes up in pushing swings alongside a mother I've met moments before, with the man behind the fish counter at the supermarket, with my gym instructor, and with our babysitter, who arrives to put our son to bed, armed with pamphlets about a nudist happiness retreat in Northern California. While the British way can be drainingly negative, the American approach to happiness can spur a debilitating anxiety. The initial sense of promise and hope is seductive, but it soon gives way to a nagging, slow-burning feeling of inadequacy. Am I happy? Happy enough? As happy as everyone else? Could I be doing more about it? Even basic contentment feels like failure when pitched against capital H happiness. The goal is so elusive and hard to define, it's impossible to pinpoint even when it's been achieved. A recipe for neurosis, in other words.
Boom.
Are you happy?
I mean, I think this is like where Mockingbird does some of its best work around how people are told the way they should feel versus how they feel. I'm also like I don't really, it's interesting for me when other people try to define happiness, because even her definition of happiness, like I was looking at our children last night at the dinner table, and they were so funny and like it and insightful, and they're at this age where they're telling us everything that happened at school, and we both just like sit there and we look at each other, you know, with knowing glances, and then we look at them, and like that feels so so beautiful it almost hurts, and it makes me so happy. But you know, I don't know, it's also so fleeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a big gift I've gotten out of this ministry and out of the podcast, frankly, has been that like, that's okay, you know, that all of our days can encompass, you know, some of the hardest things and some of the best things, and, you know, that we're never alone in that with God. I don't know. What do you think, RJ?
Well, first of all, it reminds me of that Instagram you sent us yesterday, you know, the do what you love, you know, do what you love, and you'll never work a day in your life, except never work a day in your life is crossed out. And what it reads instead is do what you love, and you'll work super hard all the time with no separation or any boundaries, and also take everything extremely personally.
I know.
And I was like,
Well, and I have to tell you, I saw a woman right
I laughed
underneath
out loud.
that.
It's so good.
She was like, wait until you're retired and then you do all this for free. And I was like, honey, no, no, baby, that is not what we say.
But just personally reflecting, you know, as a professional Christian, I think one of the stories I tell myself is that my happiness will attest to the veracity of what I profess. You know, that whether or not people will take me seriously or take the message I have seriously or take Jesus seriously is in direct proportion to how happy I pretend to be or appear to be. And then I think about the Bible. I'm like, how many people in the Bible would you describe as happy? You know, and I'm like, I'm not so many. And the other reality is that, you know, because I now post all my sermons on YouTube because that's the world we live in. Far and away, my most watched sermon this year was on sadness. Like, was just straight up on sadness.
Yeah.
And people have told me how much that meant to them, and I'm like, what is true here? What is true here? And you know, you don't want to be too much yourself, you know, but it's a bit enslaving. You know, this desire, this need, this American need, an American Christian need in particular, to be happy all the time, rather than having the freedom to sort of tell the truth and live in the light, you know, which ironically leads to something kind of like happiness, kind of like freedom, kind of like joy, but you have to have the courage to be willing to tell the truth.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I was at a commission on ministry meeting yesterday, which is like fancy talk for like people who want to be ordained. They have to go through all these meetings. And so there were all these people from all over the diocese at it. Lots of male rectors under the age of 50. And I know all these guys, right? Because we're all,
They sound amazing.
Don't they sound amazing?
I think you're married to one of them.
I am married to one of them. And I would say, how's it going? And they were all like, it's great. Everything's great. Like church is like, one of them was even like, church is great. I was like, wait. Did you find a place the pandemic's not happening? Like church is great. Like I was just like, what? And then I came home to my sweet husband and he said, I think I pretty much said the same thing when people asked me how it was going. And it is that. So I do want to speak to the fact that it's easier for some of us to say, for whatever reason, and sometimes that's gender, it's not great. Everything's really hard, and I'm struggling. And I think, it's a lot. Sometimes that's depending on your station in life and your job. It is really, really, you're pushed into this place where you have to say, everything's great. It's great. It's amazing. Everything's amazing, when it's not. And that's a huge burden to bear.
Yeah. Huge.
In fact, one of the most comforting things I saw today, I woke up and on Facebook from a guy I know who heads up one of the largest kind of clergy Christian recruiting firms in the country, says, question, has 2020 gotten you down at any point? You're not alone. Way too many leaders I work with say, all caps, yes. I'd love to hear what's helping you cope. Message me. And it has like only 5 thumbs up. Like people are probably, they're like, I'm not liking that.
Right.
But I kind of want to know. I kind of want to call and be like, how many messages did you get? Because I certainly thought of it, because I'm doing fine. But I thought about, maybe.
Tell me who I need to pray for.
One of the things I almost brought into this, I guess I'll bring it in now to this podcast, was there's an article about the real roots of midlife crisis that Jonathan Rauch wrote in 2014, I think, in The Atlantic. And he talks about the U-bend of happiness, where people are happier when they're younger, and then they're happier when they're older. And then there's and in fact, this precise demographic you describe, which are sort of professionals in the age of 40 to 50, tend to be the unhappiest of all. And a lot of that has to do with, but it goes younger too. And because we see this, I think I see it a lot of times in 20-somethings, in fact, that there's what's called an expectation hangover. I love this term, expectation hangover, in that you're told that your college years will be the best years of your life, or your 20s will be the best years of your life, and that you'll get better and better, and things are going to open up for you. And then, of course, either the meritocracy doesn't really work, or there's a pandemic, or there's a recession.
Or you get what you wanted, and it wasn't all that
Or
good.
you get what you wanted, and if you have, in fact, having a little success, those are actually the most. They interview all these people because they say it holds across the whole world, and they say that the people that were in poverty were actually happier than the ones who had gotten out of poverty, because they wanted to keep going. And they had sort of gotten a narrative of themselves as getting better and better and better. Now, I find it's very true for people in their 40s, but men, women, I don't know. If I just know that in my own context, I see a lot of looking around and comparing. And is this all there is? Maybe I've got the kids, I've got the marriage, I've got the house, but I've still got this inner sense, because I don't really think of myself as a very happy person. I think like I have happy moments, but I've just dealt with depression for so long in my life that I feel like happiness is the exception, not the rule. And again, RJ, I completely identify with this idea that you're selling a product, that I'm not only a member, I'm also the president.
This works.
Yeah,
it really works. Jesus works.
But that sense of the higher the expectations we have for how happy we're going to be, the less happy we are. And that is like, that's universally true. And this sense in like you can Americans get so unhappy about their happiness or about their happiness pursuits that it feels like a recipe for disaster. And I mean, what the guy says in the article is that you then, once you're at 40 and you say, is this all there is? And then all of a sudden you get to 50 and you think, I guess I'm pretty grateful for what I have. And then it kind of gets better and better and better. I don't know if that's true. I'm only 41. I don't know if people feel more and more grateful, and you stop comparing yourself quite as much to other people around you. But I do know that the expectation plays a huge role in our anxiety and in our happiness.
I mean, Dave, speaking as the one here who's closest to 50, and it's, how old am I again? I think it's 4 years. God, it's 4 years off. That's so crazy to me. I still kind of think of myself in my mind as kind of being 35.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm almost 50, and it has in the past few, I'm going to be 50.
If you could see his skin,
No, but I'm going to be 50.
Dorian Gray over here. Yeah.
What is it? I mean, there's a little bit of like, will I feel happy with what I've accomplished? Will I have done enough? Will I be in a stage in my life where I feel that, I've accomplished enough that what I should have by the time I was 50. It's kind of nuts.
But you do, I mean, I think it's a time of life where you look around, and especially on Instagram, or we used to go to dinner parties, but now you just look at Instagram and you're like, there's no way they're as happy as they appear on Instagram. You know, that's the great comfort that we have. We deconstruct it as the ultimate goal that everyone is falling short of. And yet, as you say, I don't want to say, when I say that I'm not a very happy person, it doesn't mean I'm miserable. It just means that I don't even, at this point, know what happiness really means. Or what it would feel like. Outside of moments of joy, I experience...
It's a surprise when it happens. It's always like a blessed surprise.
It's always a surprise.
I don't think the happy person is thinking about whether or not they're happy, I guess you could say.
No, I think that's totally true. Yeah.
Or the guilt that comes with not being happy when you feel like you ought to be happy.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. It's like, I'm not happy and I feel really guilty about it.
But I also know it does help me in terms of loving other people if they're acting in alienating ways. Or they're, especially in a time when everyone is so polarized, you just want to see I know that everyone basically just wants to be happy. And that the way they're acting, they're trying to be happy. And
right.
I am too in my own way. And maybe we disagree about the means, but there's something about but what that's really saying is everyone is actually pretty unhappy.
Yes.
And so that creates love and understanding. And there you go. # low anthropology, right?
This is like the worst. Whenever anybody's like, I had a really happy childhood, I'm like, okay, we can't be friends.
Well, that's it, Dave. You're out.
Well, one of the things, it's true though. One of the things in therapy that you had to deal with is that I did have a pretty happy childhood, but that doesn't mean that the traumas that you do experience by nature of being a human are somehow less. There's a sense of like, they don't belong to me, or I have to minimize them or talk myself out of them. When in fact, some things can still be hurtful and have a traumatic effect on you, even if you overall had what was, no one dropped dead. It was. It's a way to minimize pain that I think.
It's hard to grow up in the shadow of Simeon.
It is. I feel that.
I opened myself up for that one. Any final words on happy? I mean, I'm sure we've really solved this one. We've made everyone feel.
Talk about this forever.
I mean, we could, but I hope people can find rest in us sort of revisiting this topic that no one's happy, and actually, weirdly, the happier we get, the closer we get to death, and there's something really beautiful about going home to Jesus in that. So.
Yeah, and you would hope that this pandemic would be the moment when people might actually be able to admit, but they still can't. Mm-mm. Although there was one blessed saint in my church who I just love, and I asked her, she came over and she was like helping answer the phones, and I was like, how are you doing? She's like, meh. Not so great. I was like, wow. She's like, yeah, I've just decided I'm done lying. And she's so wonderful.
That.
I love it too. I was like, you're the best. Oh my gosh.
Actually, another article that I sort of wanted to talk about today was one that Sarah wrote a long time ago about underestimating women and overconfident men. And you cite this stuff that's basically a bunch of men not feeling the ability, the permission to say that they're struggling because Brene Brown, and you talk all about this stuff, and it's exactly like what you're saying. Like, I don't, even if I am struggling, I don't feel in a room full of my peers that I can say that without there being there actually being even real repercussions.
I literally see myself like in any group setting I'm in with clergy. I always take the Naughty Bolts Weber approach, which is F it, I'll go first. and like whenever people are like, it's great, it's great, it's great. I'm like, guys, this is really sucking. Like, I think the more that we can be that presence in the room for each other, I mean, I think that, I don't know, I just think it's really important. But I know not everyone is capable of that. And I am, it was very interesting to have this conversation with my husband and have him say, well, I did that too. It's like, yeah, you probably did. Like, you're like holding this together, like, I don't know. It's just,
and there's probably times when he feels things are great. Like there's little victories that you can hold on to, but it's
100%.
overall.
But if you're talking to your colleagues, man, it's like everything is awesome.
Like, did I tell you about the time I was with a bunch of clergy and I did that? There was a guy giving a presentation and he was just going on and on about how just great his life was and all the books he was reading and the amazing vacations he took.
What did RJ say?
All this sort of stuff. and I was just like, I don't get it. Like, I don't understand. I cannot do any of that.
No.
Like, I'm struggling here. And it was a safe space to do that. And he just looks at me as like, well, I'm just really hard. I'm really sorry to hear that, but you need to get your act together. You need to get organized. And I was like, okay. And then some people came to me afterwards and they're like, RJ, thank you for saying that. I was thinking the same thing. And I found out later this particular person had like just a few months before like almost gotten divorced.
Yes.
Like really close to gotten divorced. And I was just like, come on, dude.
Just
like,
say that. Please say that.
I know.
Yeah.
It's well, let's go from that's actually a pretty good segue into another article from
You're welcome.
2011 and talking about the difficulties of doing the work that we're all engaged in some form of Christian ministry here. In 2011, Eric Weiner wrote an article called Americans Undecided About God. Now, this is one of the first big articles to use the word religious nuns, N-O-N-E-S.
Yeah.
And he said, for a nation of talkers and self-confessors, we are terrible when it comes to talking about God. The discourse has been co-opted by the true believers on one hand and angry atheists on the other. What about the rest of us? The rest of us, it turns out, constitutes the nation's fastest growing religious demographic. We are the nuns who say we have no religious affiliation at all. The percentage is even higher among young people. At least a quarter are nuns, and that was 10 years ago. Why the rise of the nuns? Well, two researchers out of Notre Dame think politics is to blame. Their idea is that we've mixed politics and religion so completely that many simply opt out of both. Apparently, they are reluctant to claim a religious affiliation because they don't want the political one that comes along with it. Whatever the case, we are more religiously polarized than ever. In my secular, urban, and urbane world, God is rarely spoken of, except in mocking, derisive tones. It is acceptable to cite the latest academic study on, say, happiness, or even better, whip out a brain scan, but God, he is for suckers and Republicans. Nuns don't get hung up on whether a religion is true or not, and instead subscribe to William James's maxim that truth is what works. If a certain spiritual practice makes us better people, more loving, less angry, then it is necessarily good and by extension true. We believe that G.K. Chesterton got it right when he said, "It is the test of a good religion whether you can joke about it." By that measure, there is very little good religion out there. Put bluntly, God is not a lot of fun.
Really on the nose these days. Sorry.
God is not a lot of fun these days. Many of us don't view religion so generously. All we see is an angry God. He's constantly judging and smiting, and so are his followers. No wonder so many Americans are enamored of the Dalai Lama. He laughs often and well. Precious few of our religious leaders laugh. They shout. What is the solution? The answer, I think, lies in the sort of entrepreneurial spirit that has long defined America, including religious America. We need a Steve Jobs of religion, someone, or ones, who can invent not a new religion, but rather a new way of being religious. Okay, so we're 10 years on from this article. The rise of the nuns does not seem to be going away. It's only getting stronger. I think the polling around the election was sort of bracing in this respect. And you have we're a part of churches that are, at least nationally, in pretty steep decline. What do you make of this? I want to hear from you as sort of a... Well, it's, you go to these church conferences or theological conferences and no one wants to really confront the elephant in the room, which is that it's dying, like this.
Well, but I was I was doing some premarital counseling recently with a couple, one of whom was kind of raised in the church, one of them who wasn't really. And they don't live in Florida, they live somewhere else, but they live in a context where it's sort of not okay to be Christian, right? It's not okay to go to church. And so we're looking over the Episcopal service, and they're wonderful, they're lovely, and they have so many questions, but also fears. Like if we talk about God at a wedding at all to people who may not be Christian, is that going to be offensive? Like they didn't say that, but that was I could feel that, And I sort of said to them, I said, hey, I've lived in California, I've lived in New York, I've lived in all sorts of places where like it was scary to talk about God. Like I totally get that. But let me say, like in my experience, if you can talk about Jesus in a way that is not confrontational, that's generous, that's a little bit funny and human and genuine, like I have not experienced people getting angry about that. And what he's talking about is sort of a new persuasive words, Thornton Wilder type thing, right? That the gospel has to be reinterpreted and recommunicated for every new generation. But I have found in a variety of contexts, like people seem to want to talk about God. They seem to want to hear about Jesus as long as you're, not using it as a cudgel, right? As long as you're not sort of beating them up with it. And Jesus is so compelling. He's so compelling. And so I hope and pray for this, that there'll be some version of talking about Jesus that's going to be palatable to people again and will not carry with it so much baggage, so much political, social baggage. Because it's not true to who he is. It's the opposite of who he is. Jesus doesn't take sides. He takes the side of sinners. That's the only side he takes,
I totally agree with you. I think about working with people who, are at an age where it's funny. When I started this job, my sweet mom was like, well, I mean, y'all are going to have, there's got to be at least 15 kids who grew up as acolytes at Rice. Like they were just going to come over. I was like, oh my gosh, like, it's not like that anymore. A lot of my students didn't grow up at church at all, and if the Episcopal Church has any kind of track record, like they got confirmed and left anyway, so they haven't been in a church in a long time. And so, we're really welcoming them for the first time into this space. And RJ, I think everything you're saying is true. I think, offering this vision of Jesus that is frankly just more biblically correct, but a guy that takes forgiveness really seriously but doesn't seem to take himself too seriously. And I think that's kind of where we land a lot in the ministry that I work with, is that we really believe this and we really mean this, and also like we are very serious about how hilarious it is too, so I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to be hopeful because I do see the numbers out of national church numbers across mainline denominations, and I kind of wonder what will be left. I think I've seen these really interesting and by interesting, I mean just very unpleasant conversations from progressive white people about what, Black and brown people should care about when it comes to church. And it's interesting. I was talking to a friend about this because some people she's Mexican, and some people had really gone after her about, the way she thinks about Jesus, the way she thinks, very seriously about theology in a I'll just say in an orthodox way, and in a way that is true to Scripture, that is true to the person of Jesus in Scripture. And she said to me, it was so powerful. She said, Sarah, what they don't understand is that Black and brown people have just needed Jesus more. And I get that we can spend all kinds of time talking about what's wrong with the right, but like that's not my context. My context is, often in my wider denomination, the far left, and how, corrective we seem to long to want to be towards everyone.
Well, it's always a cudgel, one way or another, right? Everyone is wanting to beat someone else down for not thinking the way that they think.
Everybody down. Yes.
Yeah.
But anger is an addiction, y'all, and we gotta go through the
just so
steps.
delicious.
You know what I mean?
It feels good.
Mm-hmm.
It's the drug of choice these days. I think you do have a lot of a huge amount of I think corrective going on, and just the people that have occupied the religious space for whatever reason, their personalities are quite similar, even if they're not at least we're talking about the institutional church, I guess. Even if their politics aren't that similar, or even their theology, but there's a kind of a frankly a kind of a just a Pharisaism to it that is.
Totally.
Let me tell you how to be. Let me tell you to
very,
think and live.
very, and that's why I want to straighten everyone out, and rather than be the place you go when you're not straightened out.
Sometimes I'm like, how is it that the far left of the church reminds me so much of like Southern Baptists from 1996? Like, I'm so confused. You know what I mean? Like, but there's a parallel
It's
there.
all the law.
Yeah, and there are all these people who are the nuns who don't want to participate in this. Like, A, I totally get it, and B, like, I'm so sad. Like, there's such relief in the gospel and forgiveness and grace and community, and I really long for them to know that part of the word, you know.
Yes. So what would be, here's a question then for you both. You've been at this a while. What's your elevator pitch? Say you're in an elevator with a nun, and not only do they ask you what you do, but they're sort of like, well, why should I care? What would you say?
I'd say Jesus Christ is the most compelling person who's ever lived. You know, and yeah. I mean, that sounds weird. You know, I could go into forgiveness and love and but to me, you know, being curious about who Jesus is. Yeah. You know, if you actually read about him, if you actually talk about him, it's just crazy, man. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to tell people, and I work with college students, and community is so important to them, especially right now. So we talk about, I tell people about the community of the church, and, you know, that we want to know you and want to love you because God already knows you and loves you. And we just, you know, we want to reflect that back. I mean, I think that's kind of the space I inhabit right now. Mm-hmm. When I took my job, my students were like, I love this description. They were like, this is the chill church. And I like that. And also, right, like we also mean the gospel. We mean Christ's love for a broken world. And, you know, and is there a way that we can be both of those things? Yeah. And that those things can be the same thing, right? And that's, I think, what I mean when I say, like, you know, that Jesus takes forgiveness and mercy so seriously, but doesn't take himself. I mean, he just clearly just walked through the world without a damn, you know, and in so many ways.
I mean, one of my default go-tos, I guess, would just simply, well, you know, it's the Walker Percy question. It's like, well, what else is there? And then to talk about the various competing, and that's what seculosity is. It's a way to sort of dress down or at least examine how other mock religions really operate and how they create other forms of anxiety, and some would say even worse forms of anxiety. But I don't think that's enough to say the opposite. I think to talk compellingly about my own need to be forgiven, to experience something other than something beyond what I simply deserve, and for the world to experience that. I find that to be a deeply hopeless scenario, to think about the world as being just ebb and flow, reaction, action, reaction, and that somehow the interruptive grace of God, whereby you get what you don't deserve. That to me seems to be the only hope for a drowning world, and that, in my mind, is inseparable from the person of Jesus Christ, and that is a lot for people to take in, I suppose. But I mean,
that's a long elevator.
I mean it.
Well, it boils down to, like, either this is all there is, or it's not. And if this
Right.
is all there is, like that's a pretty sad thought, and there seems to me compelling reasons to believe that there might be something more than this. There might actually be a God who cares and who loves. And then when it comes to Christianity in particular, what I've often said is I'm a Christian because I'm not good enough to be anything else. Like
Ooh,
I
that's a
can't.
good line.
Yeah.
You
I mean-
particularly. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Exactly.
I always think about this thing that happened when I was really small. There was a family in our neighborhood, and they had two girls who were around my age, and they had a little boy who was around my brother's age. And I've said before, my brother and I have a pretty wide age gap, so I knew them really well. And their brother, when he was less than 2 years old, the parents were at a neighbor's house, and the kids were running around, and he drowned in a pool, and it was horrible. And I remember it was especially horrible for my parents because there was just too many parallels, and they were not Christian. And the mom absolutely could not cope with the idea that the baby wasn't going anywhere. That was like, and the marriage did not last. She ended up finding her way into church, getting remarried, and actually having another child. But I think for me, it's like Christianity is so necessary in my life because, God forbid anything like that happen, but things like that will happen. Things of great suffering will happen. And I have to fall apart somewhere. Like I have to know that there's something. I think, RJ, what you're saying is so powerful. Like this can't be all there is. Like I can't cope with that.
Yeah, it's not.
I admire people who are like aggressively not Christian. I'm like, you must be so much stronger than I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a reason all the existentialists committed suicide.
Yeah.
Like I hate to say,
Yeah, there's a misconception, and it's not the reason people walk away from Christianity is not only because they've misunderstood it. I think they also just don't see evidence for God, and they're acting out of their own hurt and simply the God's silence. There's no. I want to respect the fact that some people do engage with the real stuff and just cannot swallow it, but I also know that. The question is always like, if your faith is not a way of getting around problems in life, it's a way of getting through them, and it's where you go when you're in the midst of them. And God, that's where God is, and that to my mind is something that has gotten lost a lot of times. And they say, well, God, this can't be true if this terrible thing has happened to me. And you say, well. Look at what happened to God. Or anyway, maybe that's too much for an elevator pitch, but I do wonder about what the next generation. I don't think we're going to take anything for granted in terms of their sort of religious point of view, but I also think that they're living under an enormous burden of proving and performance and nonstop comparison that is truly diabolical and
it's killing them.
It will take its own pound of flesh.
Yes.
I don't want to posit Christianity as a cure for your mental health, but I do think it's an oasis for people who are sick and tired and exhausted and have nowhere else to go. And I wish that would come across. In fact, the last thing we're going to read today is sort of in line with everything you've been saying. It's from Francis Spufford. His book on apologetic came out before we started this podcast, and it has some of the best language about God, and especially about Jesus.
It's incredible. If you haven't read it, you have to. I just started rereading it yesterday, not knowing we were going to talk about it. It is just so unbelievably good.
If you want to know what we mean when we say Jesus is compelling, here's how he puts it. I'm going to read a little bit from the Yeshua chapter, and we can talk about it. Lost people arouse his particular tenderness in all their varieties. People whose bodies or minds don't work properly. People especially managed by the HPT-FTU, which is his word for sin. People who one way or another fall foul of purity rules, whether it's their own doing or not. People who live beyond the usual bounds of sympathy because they're ugly or frightening or boring or incomprehensible or dangerous. People who are not people like us, whoever we happen to be. People who are not the right kind of people, whatever that is being defined as. In theory, Yeshua, Jesus, has come to help the lost sheep among the God-fearers, the lost sheep of Israel. That's what he says. But in practice, over and over again, he gives his whole attention to whoever he meets, including a multitude of foreigners and members of the occupying army. Yeshua's sense of people is not additive. More is not better. Each person in front of him is, for that moment, the one missing sheep. Yeshua, Jesus, isn't a relativist, though. Far from it. He doesn't think you should relax and do what you like, and it won't really matter what. He believes in good and evil, all right, to a drastic degree. He has a vivid, horrified sense of sin in all its elaborate, self-deceiving, semi-oblivious encrustedness. And he talks as if it overshadowed huge swaths of human activity, including human activities that humans tend to be proud of. Whenever anyone asks him about the law, he usually ups the ante. He amps the law up toward a perfectionist impossibility, in which anger is forbidden as well as murder, in which desire can be as much of a betrayal as adultery, in which internal states of being that apparently don't hurt or even affect anyone else weigh as heavily with God as external acts. He annoys people when he talks like this because the implication of his perfectionism is that everybody is guilty. And if everybody is guilty, nobody gets to congratulate themselves, and murderers and adulterers cannot be shunned. If what he says is right, then there are only people in whom the universal HPT-FTU has taken a particular turn, has been indulged in particular ways. They are not outcasts. They do not belong in a category of unclean persons that the clean rest of us can hold at arm's length. Yeshua insists that being unclean is not a temporary violation of the proper state of things. It is the normal human condition. He has a lot to say about self-righteousness, which he compares not very tactfully to a grave that looks neat and well cared for up top, but is heaving with corruption down below. Maggots, basically. And the point of this repulsive image is not just that the inside and outside of a self-righteous person don't match, that there's a hypocritical contradiction between the claim to virtue and the actual content of a human personality. It's also that, for him, being sure you're righteous, standing on your own dignity as a virtuous person, comes precious close to being dead. If you won't hear this bad news about yourself, you can't know yourself. You condemn yourself to the maintenance of an exhausting illusion, a false front to yourself which keeps out doubt, and with it hope, change, nourishment, breath, life. If you won't hear the bad news, you can't begin to hear the good news about yourself either, and you'll do harm. You'll be pumped up with the false confidence of virtue, and you'll think it gives you a license, and a large share of all the cruelties in the world will follow. For evil done knowingly is rather rare compared to the evil done by people who are sure that they themselves are good, and that evil is hatefully concentrated in some other person. And yet he, Jesus, is never disgusted. He never says that anyone is too dirty to be touched, that anyone is too lost to be found. Even in situations where there seems to be no grounds for human hope, he will not argue that hope is gone beyond recall. Wreckage may be written into the logic of the world, but he will not agree that it is all there is. He says, more can be mended than you fear. Far more can be mended than you know. I know it's a lot. It's a lot of words. It's beautiful words.
To me, those are just so persuasive, to someone who lives in the world, who is willing to just tell see the truth of their own existence and face what life looks like, what hopeless life looks like. If there's nothing more than that, to me, that connects. It might make good Christian people a little bit nervous. It makes me a little bit nervous because we want to believe the best of ourselves. We want to believe what we're capable of. And yet to someone who is a little more pessimistic or realistic or whatever, I just think he's speaking. It's the truth in a way that no one else seems to be talking about.
Yeah, it makes me think a lot about. I've been thinking a lot lately about anger and how anger is this just like the loveliest blanket emotion to wrap yourself in, so you don't have to deal with all of the emotions underneath it. And how anger and self-righteousness in a lot of ways are the same thing. I heard this story about this prisoner ex-con who was going through some sort of anger management stuff, and he was yelling and big and angry, and the facilitator asked him to literally get on the floor where his elbows or his knees were at his ears, almost to crouch that low. And then it was now tell us how you feel. And he was able then to say, I'm sad and I'm lonely and I'm disappointed. And I think that there's something about the gospel, you know, and it's funny. It's like happiness and anger, especially like the mandate of happiness, are similar, and that there are all these things underneath. And those things are so beautiful and so painful, and Jesus compels us over and over again that that's the space we're called to live in. And that's not easy at all. And, you know, I would say I spend a solid 95% avoiding that space. But that is the sweet space that we're called to live in.
That's beautiful.
And in our culture, anger is a completely accepted emotion.
Oh, totally.
Like
yeah.
if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention.
Yes.
You know, but
Yeah.
God forbid you say, I'm lonely, I'm sad,
Yeah.
I'm struggling. Like that's not allowed.
Yeah. Or
You
the,
know,
or even
anger
the
is
people
lifted
that
up.
the people that you're angry with, like to look at them and say they're struggling, right? They're lonely. They're they're trying to find hope in a hopeless moment. Like the gospel just like cracks that open, and once it's been opened, I mean that's the warning label that should come with Christianity.
Yeah.
Because you can't undo it. And so all the things you used to be able to do, I mean, I guess that maybe that's sanctification is anger doesn't feel as good as it used to.
Well, we saw a powerful example of that on Saturday Night Live last week when Dave Chappelle addressed the nation and ended up sort of pleading for magnanimity on behalf of the people that the sort of villains in that scenario.
Remember how you felt 4 years ago. Half of the country is feeling that way right now.
Yeah.
And that's he could say it. I can't say it. In fact, I got a vicious response to something I wrote recently, in which the person said that our take on grace is so overpowering that it suggests that what we do doesn't matter, and that nothing we do matters, and it's a sort of an individual piety, which is it was a. I can know where they would get that impression, and yet at least what Spufford is saying about Jesus is that no, what you do matters. It matters more than you know.
Jesus. That's so, I mean, Dave, you're so gracious, but like I am such a kinder person because of the message of the gospel. I'm such a more generous person because of the message of grace. Like I get really frustrated when people say that about us. I get mad, but I get angry because underneath it, I'm like, you don't know how broken I was. Like you don't know how much I lived in anger and self-righteousness and rage before I heard this. Like it just is like you've missed the point if you think that it's too much. You've missed the point.
Or when you think that then therefore because all of your actions matter so much that you're just going to give up eventually. And
like
it's a new kind of slavery.
It's a new kind of slavery. Sarah, you said something to me the other day. It was one of these Holy Spirit moments. So I got a text one night. I was feeling discouraged after actually receiving this very attacking response. And you said to me, you said, if you're really on the side of grace, you have to accept the fact that there aren't any sides.
Which was so weird, Dave, because, you know, I'm all pray by my bedside on my knees. And I had prayed and I got up and the phone was right there. And it literally was like, God was like, you need to text this to Dave Saul. And because I didn't really know what was going on with this email or whatever. And so it was such a Holy Spirit moment. And anyway, but it's true. Like, I mean, I totally feel like those aren't even my words. Like God just,
if you're really on the side of grace, you have to accept the fact that there aren't any sides. I mean, that to me, it's enough to make me cry right this minute thinking about it, because our sides are so precious to us. And you know, the last thing the self-righteous person wants to give up is their righteousness, and it's including myself. And you know, anyway, that to me was a Jesus moment spoken to me when I thought, oh crap, have I taken the wrong side in some way? Have I been irresponsible in advocating for the unheard in my own way? And it was anyway. It was a Holy Spirit moment for me, and I thank you for it, Sarah. And I want everyone to hear that, because that's the warning label that needs to come on the package when you become a Christian. Like, warning, you're not going to be able to basically be on any side that you're on too strongly is going to you're going to be stripped of it. It's the second.
But you'll be you'll be on everyone's side.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's that you don't take. It's not that it's an absence of sides. It's that you're
Right.
on everyone's side.
Right.
Because Jesus is on everyone's side, and not to say I accomplish that at all.
Right.
But that's what we're called to, right?
That's like the choose your adventure books. You guys remember those? Like, I feel like
Yes.
there's always like an extra step for Christians. It's like we do the step everybody does, right? Initially, where we're like, I'm bad as hell and I'm gonna key a car. And then but on Christians choose your adventure, there's like a little note underneath that's like, turn to page 42. And then you get to page 42 and you're like, you got to remember that Jesus loved these people just the way he loves you and all your wretchedness. And you're like, damn.
I know. It does. It undercuts you.
It's not just deconstruction.
No.
Yes.
So, well, that's 200 episodes of this reminder of, or hopefully, if those emails we read at the beginning of the time have any merit, well, then hopefully that Jesus is on all of our side in the midst of our conflicted, heavy demands and unhappy, very often unhappy, but also occasionally deeply joyous everyday lives, not out there, not in the news, but actually where we're living. And I thank you, both of you, for being a part of it. And I also have to thank TJ Hester, who is the guy behind the boards, and he's an incredible cheerleader, but also he's the reason that these don't sound distractingly bad. And I just am grateful for his patience, and I'm grateful for everyone who listens, and for those who support the ministry of Mockingbird. This is we're so thankful, and we hope please pray for us as we continue in this, because next week or in a couple weeks, Ethan is recording the sports issue episode of the podcast, so that'll come out next, and then we'll come back for a couple of Advent Christmassy ones. But for the most part,
RJ will sing.
RJ, you give us one last
Absolutely.
sing?
It's the most wonderful
Oh
time.
my gosh. RJ, you're like...
That's my Johnny Mathis impression.
Oh, yeah. But also Tom, the British guy. Tom from the 70s.
It's not unusual
Tom Jones.
Yes!
to be alone.
Love Tom Jones. Love Tom Jones. Welsh power. Okay. Well, to those...
Not unusual to be loved by you
Happy
guys.
Thanksgiving.
Praise
I'm
God.
thankful for you.
You too.
All right,
Thankful
bye,
for you
you
guys.
guys.
Bye. Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by TJ Hester. And if you like what you've heard, please drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Until next time.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.